Morning, everybody.
Morning.
This week, we have the privilege of celebrating Yom Yerushalayim. And I wanted to discuss a little bit about the halachic significance and relationship to the halacha that this particular day has, and some of the issues concerned with whether it's permissible to declare a new holiday, a new yontif. A lot of the same issues occurred for Yom Ha'atzmaut as well, but I wanted to make some distinctions between Yom Yerushalayim and Yom Ha'atzmaut in terms of Hallel, in terms of the different positions regarding the status of the day in halach. Unfortunately, there have been many times in Jewish history when the Jewish people have been threatened with destruction, various wars, and some of these events have been memorialized as holidays. Hanukkah, Purim, these are two holidays that are post-biblical, and they made it into the canon. They made it into the official roster of holidays. We say Hallel on Hanukkah. Now, Hanukkah took place at a time when Sanhedrin was still functioning. So the Mishnah was still around at that time. So the rabbis then could declare a holiday. At least they had the authority to do so. Purim is a little bit trickier. Purim happened much later. And there are issues with whether or not Purim was considered to, actually it was earlier, well, not later, sorry, it was earlier, but the rabbis were not so quick. And there's a big dispute in the Gemara Megillah what the status of Purim was. It was basically Esther who said, I want to make this into a holiday, Kisluni Ladoros. And it wasn't all of the Jews, it was just the Jews in Persia, Jews in the Asia Minor, where the majority of Jews were living at the time. But nevertheless, the rabbis decided and made it into a holiday. A lot of interesting halakha questions. We don't have time to go into all of them. But the classic question in the Gemara is, we make a bracha. Asher kedeshayim zasav tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Chanukah. Make a bracha on mikvah Megillah. So how do we say Asher kedeshayim b'mitzvah sav when it's not in the Torah? Shalosh regalim are in the Torah. That you can't argue with. These are rabbinic holidays. So do the rabbis, in fact, have the authority to declare a new holiday? And if they do have that authority, does that include recitation of Hallel or new mitzvos? I mean, Purim is a whole slew of mitzvos. Sudas Purim, Mishloach Manos, Matanos Levionim, Mikvah Megillah. These are all rabbinic. So how could you say Asher Kedesham b'mitzvos of Vitzivanu? That's a fascinating discussion all by itself, perhaps for a different day. But that shows the ability of the rabbis to make those kind of decisions. Now, the only difficulty with that issue is that the rabbis at that time had universal acceptance in the Jewish community. Today, you don't have that anymore. If a group of rabbis says yes, there'll be other bunch of rabbis who say no, and other rabbis in between. So you have many, many different issues that are floating around here. So putting aside Yom Ha'atzmaut for a moment, where Israel became a sovereign nation for the first time in almost 2,000 years, that falls into a separate category. You could argue that Yom Ha'atzmaut affected the entire Jewish world, because now Israel is a homeland for all Jews, and it's something that affects not just a regional group of Jews, but it affects the entire Jewish community, even though all the Jews were not living in Israel at that time when Israel was proclaimed an independent country. And that's a separate status for a number of different reasons. Yom Yerushalayim, however, is very different for a number of reasons. Israel already existed in 1967, but its very existence was threatened, much more so than it was in 56 during the Suez crisis. And you have to bear in mind, behind all of these discussions, that in all the battles that Israel fought, it only has to lose once, and it's game over. They can't afford even one loss. So this is what was, I guess, behind the minds of the leadership in May of 1967, going back a few years. The Egyptian president Nasser expelled the United Nations from the Sinai Peninsula. They were like a peacekeeping force. He expelled them, and Egypt posted 1,000 tanks and 100,000 soldiers on the Israeli border. They were positioned there. Jordan and Syria signed mutual defense treaties, and all the Arab nations were aligned, ready to attack Israel. All of a sudden, they put their differences aside, and they all wanted to destroy Israel. And therefore, Israel launched a preemptive attack on June 5th, 1967. And in the annals of military history, it was an amazing, amazing attack, because within 3 hours after they started the war, they had totally demolished the Egyptian Air Force, the Jordanian Air Force. They wiped out all the planes of all the Arab armies within the first 3 hours of the war. Amazing thing. And then, of course, it's called the 6-day war, because they won the decisive victory, and they would have, if the United Nations, if the United States had not intervened, Secretary of State Kissinger forced Israel to stop fighting. They stopped fighting. They had surrounded the Third Egyptian Army. They probably could have gone all the way to Cairo and Damascus. Not they would have needed all the extra real estate. This was in 67.
They didn't go that.
73, it happened again in 73. The point is, they could have captured more. Look, Israel tripled their real estate in 6 days. They eventually gave the Sinai back because it was unmanageable. They didn't need it. What are they going to do with all that desert? And they couldn't protect it. But in any event, bearing in mind that Israel has to lose only once, and they won a decisive victory in 67, and part of the armistice in 1948 gave the Jordanian government control over Yerushalayim, the old city. And for 19 years, Jews had no access to their holiest city. The Jews were forced to leave. Every year on Tisha B'Av, Jews used to gather on the rooftop of the Yimka building, the YMCA building on King David Street, which was the tallest place in Yerushalayim at that time, to peer and be able to see the Kotel. But for 19 years, they had no access to Yerushalayim. So by winning Yerushalayim, getting it back, and the political discussions of why they gave the Harabayit back to the Jordanians and why they gave Hebron back to the Arabs, that's a whole separate issue. We're looking at the political issue. It was a very unfortunate decision, and short-sighted by Moshe Dayan and Rabin, because they thought it would make peace. Obviously, it was a wrong decision.
Most Israelis at that time thought that they would trade the land.
They thought, okay. Now, the status of this capture of Yerushalayim ignited all kinds of things. It ignited almost a messianic fervor in Yerushalayim. It started the whole yeshiva movement in Israel. They popped up all over the place. And of course, the significance of having Yerushalayim became a religious issue. In the sense, now we have Yerushalayim back. We're never going to get rid of it again. We're never going to give it away in any negotiation. And it's not going to become an international city, no matter what the politicians say. How do we celebrate this victory? It has religious overtones. Do we declare it a semi-holiday? Do we recite Hallel? What are the parameters for declaring a holiday and deciding the nature of this observance? Now, bear in mind, it has, even though there are many, what shall I say, strong feelings emotionally about the nature of getting Yerushalayim back, we have to look at it from a halachic structure. Now, I was told by two different rabbis, two very prominent rabbis. One rabbi said, if you really believe in Zionism, you'll say Hallel with a bracha on Yom Yerushalayim. There's no question about it. Except there are questions about it. Another very prominent Rav, a graduate of the Hebron Yeshiva, way back when, past president of the RCA, very involved with the OU, and he said, Hallel with a bracha on Yom Yerushalayim. Yom Ha'atzmaut, maybe not with a bracha, but Yom Yerushalayim, definitely with a bracha. But again, and this was a guy who knew halakha, it's not a simple question. It's not a simple question. Zev Siegel, Nachum Siegel's father, very prominent Rav, past president of the RCA, rabbi of many, many years standing in Jersey. Now, are there historical precedents for declaring a yontif and adding tefillot? So Hallel, perhaps not, although there are some cases. We have the holiday of Purim. We celebrate Purim that occurred in Shushan. If you Google Purim or you go to an encyclopedia, there are many communities. There's the Cairo Purim, there's the Nuremberg Purim, there's this, many, many cities declared a holiday called Purim after some miraculous event occurred that saved them from a pogrom or some other type of tragedy. And every year they would celebrate that with Hallel perhaps and special tefillot. We have the Chai Yadam. The Chai Yadam is a very important sefer halacha, probably more significant than the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. And he says that his family that had a fire, and the family was saved from a certain fire in 1804. And every year, to celebrate his family emerging unharmed, they would say Tehillim, they would light candles, they would have a Suda, they would celebrate like a Yontif to celebrate this great salvation for a particular family. You have many, many precedents, many precedents. You have it in Frankfurt on Main on the 20th day of Adar. It's a Yontif because they were saved from a certain pogrom. And there are a number of, throughout history, you have many Purims. The Chassam Sofer, one of the Gedolei HaPoskim, says that you can't establish a day in terms of commemorating miracles unless it affected the entire Jewish people. And he was against creating new holidays. And he also very much was upset with the goings-on in Meron on Lag BaOmer. So what are you creating a yontif for? Especially a person who died, you don't celebrate it, you learn Torah, you fast. You don't have parties, bonfires. He's very opposed to that. Rav Soloveitchik was well known. Soloveitchik was opposed to creating new holidays. Very opposed to it, although he allowed people to say Hallel without a bracha. That was his concession. Nobody really knows what the Rav himself did on Yom Ha'atzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim, because on those days he would stand in a corner, cover himself completely with his talus, stand up against the wall. Nobody knew what he was doing. And believe me, people looked. They tried. But he conceded, all right, you're saying Tehillim, so what's the big deal? We say Tehillim without a bracha, which is our minhag in the shul. We say Tehillim without a bracha on Yom Ha'atzmaut, and we say it on Yom Yerushalayim. Given the fact that you have a number of poskim who do find precedence based on these various Purim celebrations that will go on, you also would have precedence for the fact that Purim itself was established based on certain biblical precedents. In halakhic jargon, they call it a reshus versus a chova. It's voluntary as opposed to obligatory. Hanukkah, they struggled very hard with that question, but it's interesting, very important. In order, I'll jump ahead to Sam's question. Why do we celebrate Hanukkah? So if you look at the Gemara, it's not because of the military victory. It's not the reason. We celebrate Hanukkah because of the miracle of the Pak Shemin. So on miracles, you can say Hallel, you can celebrate. On military victories, not so certain. So to avoid the question of celebrating a military victory, perhaps that's the reason why they focus on the Pak Shemin. The miracle of the oil. On miracles, yes, then you can celebrate. And again, the difference between optional versus obligatory. There is, by the way, and again, in Israel, you have great poskim in Israel. You had various chief rabbis. You had members of the Rabbanut HaRashit, Shuvos Kol Mavaser. You have a number of very, very important poskim who, based on various precedents, based on various chuvos, other community events, they paskin that on Yom Ha'atzmaut, and Yom Yerushalayim, you say full Hallel with a bracha, and they bring support for that. There is even a machzor for Yom Yerushalayim and Yom Ha'atzmaut, which has all the special tefillos in it, the special Haftorah, and a Seudah. In many places, if you daven in a Zionist minyan, they would say the Yantuf Psukei de Zimra. It's a tefillah chagigit. It's a celebratory type of davening. Interesting. Now, again, normative halacha is that we say Hallel on Hanukkah. We don't say it on Purim. The Megillah is like the Hallel. And the Gemara talks about there are only 18 days or 21 in Golos that we say Hallel. How do you add extra to that? The Rambam and the Vilna Gaon, for example, did not say Hallel with a bracha on Rosh Chodesh. Because if you really study it carefully, Hallel on Rosh Chodesh that we're going to be saying this next week is a minhag. It's not a halacha, it's a minhag. And on a minhag, you don't make a bracha. So based on that particular Rambam and that particular Vilna Gaon's teaching, you could say psukim from Tehillim, which is Hallel, on any happy, just don't make a bracha. So that would be the easiest way to deal with it. But commemorating military victories per se would not be something that the rabbis would endorse. Even though it might be what they call a nes nigla, if it's a miracle that everybody agrees it's a miracle, so that could be the announcement of Israeli independence. The formation of the state of Israel could be construed, as some do, as a nes nigla. It's an amazing thing, a miracle that Israel should once again have sovereignty and be independent. There are others, on the other hand, who opposed Israel on philosophic grounds. I mean, the Satmar Rebbe and others of his ilk were opposed to the formation of Israel. So they definitely, there's a famous quote, the Panavisha Rav, Rav Shach, Nachum Shach, first Panavisha Rav, which is the Panavisha is very far to the right. And they asked him, how do you daven on Yom Ha'atzmaut? his response was, I say what Ben Gurion says. I don't say Tachano, I don't say Hallel. Milty, what's your question?
Comes to Purim, you don't say how.
Right.
The reason I spoke was it's not an Eretz Yisrael. Right? But why do we say Al Hanisa on Purim? If we say Al Hanisa, we're saying it's a nace, and therefore we should say Al Hanisa.
So the Gemara asked that question. The Gemara Megillah asked that question, and the answer to the question is that the reading of the Megillah constitutes the recitation of Hallel for this particular holiday. That's how they get around it. But again, if somebody wanted to say Hallel without a bracha on Purim, you're saying Prakim of Tehillim. You can do it. Many people, as I said, the Chayadim and many communities, today you don't have, but in Damascus, in Cairo, throughout Europe, Amsterdam, many places celebrated a Purim with a small p for a pogrom that didn't happen, or some type of salvation, or being cured from the Black Plague, whatever it might have been. Things happened that communities celebrated, and they said Hallel without a bracha. So you can always say Tehillim. These particular Tehillim form Hallel, but you can say it. Saying it with a bracha can be justified. Meshulam Roth, one of the Gedolim of pre-statehood Israel, in his Chuvos, gives a whole long reason and gives all the sources why you should say Hallel with a bracha on Yom HaAtzmaut. He wasn't alive for Yom Yerushalayim, but he would probably, the same thing would probably apply for that too. And in Israel, many yeshivos, many places will say Hallel with a bracha, and outside of Israel, the more Zionist minyanim will say it with a bracha. They have, again, most normative Orthodox shuls will say Hallel without a bracha, but there are many places in the United States, in Canada, and Europe that will say Hallel with a bracha on Yom Yerushalayim, given the various factors that we talked, whether it's a Nes Nigla. I mean, how do you describe little Israel going up against 5 Arab nations and winning in 6 days? If that isn't a miracle, and the military tactics, by the way, that they used are still studied in West Point. How they just lightning victory. Again, within the first 3 hours of the war, they immobilized the air force of all the Arab nations. They bombed all the airports and knocked out all their fighter planes. Within 3 hours of the war began. So that made it a land war, which otherwise it would have been very terrible. It would have bombed all the cities in Israel. So they knew what they were doing. Yeah.
To Wiltie's point, I think I remember learning this. If someone is traveling or they just don't have a bill, they don't have access to it, I think they can say, Lou, I'm not here with the bill.
Could be. I mean, you can always say Tehillim. The Lomalav and Lomorud, it doesn't hurt to say Tehillim. Okay. Now, there's also a point of view. Again, we're analyzing from a halachic perspective, not an emotional perspective. You know, just because you're a Zionist doesn't mean you can say Hallel with a bracha. You need a halachic basis for it. Many Rishonim say that you say with a bracha depends on whether it applies to the entire Jewish community being saved, whether it took place in Israel or outside Israel. There's different machlokas Rishonim about that. The Meiri, one of the classic French Rishonim, says, without a bracha is probably preferable. But many Rishonim hold that if the entire nation is saved from danger, you can recite Hallel. And they differ in terms of the bracha or not a bracha. Interestingly, that the She'iltos, the Netziv, says that the recitation of Hallel upon deliverance from nature only applies that year and not in following years. In other words, according to the Netziv, in 1967, after the war was won, everybody should say Hallel. And that's it. You were saved, your lives were saved, Israel was secure, say Hallel. But in following years, he wasn't necessarily so thrilled with it. Avadia Yosef and almost all the chief rabbis of Israel, Paskin, definitely you would say Hallel with a bracha. In conclusion, you can build a strong case for saying Hallel. The 6-Day War was different, I think, qualitatively than the declaration of the State of Israel. You can make a case in both directions. Many rabbinic figures have grappled with this. Many, again, most of the Rabbanim in Israel come out in favor of saying Hallel with a bracha. Most rabbinic figures today, centrist, maybe a little bit to the right of center as well, would acquiesce to saying Hallel without a bracha. Then, of course, you have those all the way to the right who don't say Hallel at all. Whether they say Tachanun or not, I don't know. But
Some places, I was in a place where they said Tachanun.
all right, look. Yes, I can't hear you. Sfardim would again, Sfardim in Israel will say Hallel with a bracha. Sephardic minyan in Yonim outside of Israel, some would say with a bracha, some would say without. Yeah, well, Avadia Yosef, who was a Chacham Roshi, Paskin, you say Hallel with a bracha. So they would follow Chacham Avadia in that regard, and most of them would say it with a bracha. Again, I'll say, unfortunately, people look at it as a test of your Zionist credentials. Do you say Hallel with a bracha? And I think that's wrong. It's nothing to do with your Zionist credentials. It's based on a halakhic understanding of when you offer hoda'ah to Hashem. And if you feel that, and it's objective as well as subjective. Objectively, Israel was saved during the 6-Day War. Now, they started a preemptive war in order to do that, but had they not done that, they would have been lost, would have been destroyed. So Israel, for sure, would have an obligation in Israel to say Hallel with a bracha. I would say, no questions asked. Outside of Israel, since we weren't there, but it represents our aspirational home, quote unquote, certainly expressing gratitude to Hashem for having Israel and getting Yerushalayim back, never to be lost again, hopefully, merits our gratitude to Hashem and the recitation of Hallel. The only halakhic question is whether with a bracha or not, because again, if you want to interpret Asher Kedishar Mitzvosav Tzivon Lekroas Hallel, meaning that the halacha allows you to say Hallel when a great salvation takes place, there are panim lakan and panim lakan. As I said, normative halacha, according to most poskim today, we do say Hallel, but without a bracha in Chutz La'aretz. In Israel, it's a different situation because the part of the machlokas has to do with all of Israel being saved versus part of Israel. When the entire Jewish community was located in Israel, but then again, look what happened in Purim. The entire Jewish community was not located in Shushan or in Persia. So maybe more of them than there are now in one place. But in any event, it's a fascinating machlokas. If you, what's the name of it? There's the tshuva, I think it's Chavtet, tshuva Kol Mavaser. Shelos Teshuvos Kol Mavaser, Rav Meshulam Roth, who was a member of the Rabbanut HaRashit, wrote the classic responsa on saying Hallel with a bracha on Yom Ha'atzmaut. And the same thing can apply for Yom Yerushalayim as well. The Jewish Agency and the Rabbanut published a thin volume called Seder Yom Ha'atzmaut, which gives you a lot of the halachos and also haftorah to say on Yom Ha'atzmaut and special readings. There's a special tefillah that people even say, some places even say Hallel at night on Yom Ha'atzmaut. I think now, not Art Scroll, what's the other big, one of the contemporary publishers published a machzor, like an Art Scroll type of thing, for Yom Ha'atzmaut and Yom Yerushalayim. So you can get a whole new, with all the extra prayers and the discussion about this thing. So it's because I remember very clearly, Rav Meir Hershkowitz, Zecher Tzadok Livracha, wonderful, wonderful teacher, very Zionistic, and he taught. And we were college students. But he says, when you get married, you have a family, make sure your kids get all dressed up on Yom Ha'atzmaut. Yom Yerushalayim hadn't happened yet. Make sure you get dressed up on Yom Ha'atzmaut as if you're going to shul on Shabbos, celebrating with a Seudah, and of course, say Hallel. He would probably say it with a bracha. I don't remember what exactly he said about that, but he said make sure that people should know it is a festive day. It's a holiday, and it made a very, very strong impression on many, many people. He was very, and he was a survivor of the Holocaust, but he was very, very Zionistic, and he felt very, very strongly to get dressed up. Your children should know it, and it should be celebrated as a holiday. So hopefully, on Friday, I think in Israel, it's a nidcha, I think. They do it on Sunday, I believe, in Israel this year, right? Because it comes out on Friday, so in order to avoid Chil Shabbos, they do it on Thursday or Sunday in Israel. Huh? I can't hear you. Thursday night and Friday. Yeah, okay. Because yeah, because sometimes when it comes out on a Friday, they're worried about Chil Shabbos, so they'll push it off and make it early. It's Friday night. So Thursday night and Friday. Okay, good. So I wish you all a happy Yom Yerushalayim.
Wally.
Yes.
Question. You said
Yes.
the ultra right probably don't say Hallel at all. What's their
Correct.
problem?
Yes.
What's their problem?
What their problem is with the state of Israel. Koren. So Koren is the one that puts out the Yom HaSchol Machzor. The answer to Howie's question, the extreme right. There's a Gemara that talks about the 3 Shavuos. Israel swore 3 oaths. One of them was that they would not take Israel by force until Mashiach comes. But part of the fact remains that it was based on other nations not, attacking Israel, and since the other conditions no longer applied, so we have no problems halachically and based on Gemara of establishing a country of Israel based on military might and protecting it. The right wing is opposed to Israel on philosophical grounds. Probably, aside from this Gemara about the 3 Shavuos, it also opposed to it because Israel was founded by a secular socialist group of people. The contemporary Zionist movement under Herzl was not religiously oriented. Now, they have themselves to blame for this, because prior to Herzl, in the middle of the 19th century, before the first Zionist Council in 1898, there was a group called the Chovevei Tzion, which was a religious Zionist movement. You have a number of East European Rabbanim, Rabbi Yehuda Hai Alkalai, and a few others, the Netziv, a number of prominent Rosh Yeshiva, other one, I forget the third guy. Anyway, but a prominent European Rabbanim who wanted to found what they call the Shivas Tzion movement, Return to Zion. It was a religious Zionist movement. The rabbinic establishment, unfortunately, was afraid to get involved with the Zionist movement. They had just gotten over a few hundred years before the Shabtai Tzvi movement, and they were afraid that a Zionist movement might be another messianic type of thing. So the rabbis kind of backed off. Had the rabbis been more proactive, then Israel would have been a religious Zionist movement before Herzl. But it petered out. So Herzl, as a result of the Dreyfus trial, picked up the mantle, and the modern Zionist movement started, but it was a secular movement. So that's why on the right, they were not in favor of it. Even though, oddly enough, David Ben-Gurion gave many concessions to the small religious community in Israel. He was the one that granted draft exemptions to yeshiva students, because he figured the modern Israel, the chalutzim and the soldiers, this religious movement is going to die out. So from the original 700 students who got draft exemptions in 1948, you've got thousands and thousands now. It's causing a tremendous political problem in Israel. But I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay. Other than that, any other questions? Have a wonderful day and enjoy celebrating Yom Ha'atzmaut Thursday night and Yom
Yom
Yerushalayim. Yom Yerushalayim on Thursday night and Friday, and say Hallel with great joy.
With or without a bracha.
Okay.
Thank you, Wally. Thank you, Wally.
Shalom Baruch Yatov Yad Allah. Baruch Shachal Mishalot Tzedok Hayinu. Amen. Okay.
Yeah, I think so.